Welcome to Capitals Uncovered, the Pelle Roth Taylor and Martin Sieve show. We talk about geopolitics. And geopolitics is coming to the home region, as it were. I'm in a coast, away from my usual desk, and I'm in a coastal region of Sweden. And in the house belonging to a foreign correspondent friend of mine who's been all over the world in war zones. And he said, I'm going to retire to peaceful Sweden. So he bought a house on the coast of Sweden. And I said, you've just bought yourself the first class seat to witness World War III. So, I mean, he's not very happy about the latest developments in Scandinavia, which have turning from a geopolitical and peaceful and wonderful backwater into the latest conflict zone. And that's partly due to I would say, the enthusiasm and the Russophobia of the Scandinavian military and political establishments. And I think one of the best guests to talk about this, where things have really hotted up, there was a NATO meeting in the Swedish town of Helsingborg last week. It's Mats Nilsson, a geopolitical analyst. He's got a legal background, and a lot of people. He's been on many, many shows, most recently on the Duran, but many people follow him on various other shows. He's probably one of the top analysts on Swedish affairs that there is. Welcome to show, Mats.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the
Um,
kind words.
well, I mean, it's very interesting because you're talking about you've most recently you made a very astute analysis on another podcast about how precisely who's running the show, because it isn't necessarily the politicians and certainly not the people in Sweden, in the world's best democracy the Swedes boast about being, but one of the most oligarchic societies of the world is Sweden, with a very strong family that seems to run everything behind the scenes. Can you tell us a little bit about this cabal that is running things behind the scenes, and are things really hotting up in Scandinavia? Over to you.
Over to me. Well, where to begin? Well, it's yes, there is of course a family behind the scenes in Sweden that are, if not running things, at least influencing things to go the way they wish them to go, which is basically the same thing. And this is the Wallenberg family. And it's if we go back a bit, if you can give me that time, I would like to just present the historical background to the family, and it will become quite obvious that they are one of these classical military industrial banking profiteers. During World War II, as many of you are aware, Sweden's official neutrality policy was one which forced the Wallenberg family, who was already in the 1930s quite an influential banking family. They were forced to keep the economic channels open to both sides of the conflict. And their bank, Stockholms Enskilda Bank, SEB, was their flagship industrial interest bank. They had gained a priority after the fact that Ivan Kreuger, another of these Swedish financial individuals, was, how shall I put it? He committed suicide in Paris, but there is actually quite a lot of evidence that he was suicided by
Yes.
someone. And due to the fact that Kreuger so unfortunately met his demise, his unfortune was the fortune of the rising Wallenberg family. So there are shenanigans tied to the Wallenberg families that even involve questions about how they were or were not involved in the death of Ivan Kreuger. This is all on the internet if you want to look it up further, but this is just a sideshow on my part. So I will get back to World War II. Wallenberg also owned the ball bearing company SKF. Now, ball bearings were an indispensable part of a war effort. They were in most military industrial components and parts and tanks and anti-aircraft guns, and you name it. You needed a good ball bearing. So what Wallenberg did, they used two of their brothers, and one of the brothers was seconded to Germany. So the bank acted as a conduit for German payments and credits. So Sweden supplied Nazi Germany with high-grade iron ore, and the Wallenberg-controlled mining and steel companies were central to this trade. And also, of course, the ball bearings. SKF, effectively controlled by the Wallenbergs, held a near monopoly at the time on high precision bearings, vital for, like I said, the tanks, the aircraft, the submarines, etc., etc. And during the war, SKF factories in Germany, France, and elsewhere supplied the Wehrmacht, while the parent company in Sweden exported bearings to the Reich under government-approved quotas. Uh, the bank also helped German clients manage assets in Sweden, and at times they also facilitated a kind of camouflage of Jewish-owned firms abroad. So post-war investigations in the US noted that their bank had taken over some foreign subsidiaries of German companies in order to shield them from Allied seizure, and also thereby involved in plundering Jewish assets in Germany. So, one of the Wallenberg's brothers cultivated top Nazis. Hermann Goering was one example, and the family justified these contacts as necessary to keep Sweden out of the war and to gain intelligence, which was, of course, partly true, but mostly they did it for profit. And at the same time, you had SKF plants in the United States, in Philadelphia to be more exact, if I'm not mistaken, but I believe it was in Philadelphia. And also in Britain, you had these SKF produced ball bearings for the Allied war machine.
Yes.
So the Swedish company also supplied the Allies indirectly through these companies while formally observing exports restrictions. And Jacob Wallenberg, the brother who was seconded to the United States and the Allied side during the war, served as a secret intermediary between the German opposition and Western allies. And the forerunner to the CIA, the Office of Strategic
Policy coordination.
Services,
Services.
yes,
OSS.
exactly,
Yes.
the OSS, recruited him also through the back channels. And he in 43, 44, he passed on feelers from Germany and German industrialists who wanted to topple Hitler. And US diplomats in Stockholm and were also involved in this Allied Wallenberg network.
But before you
So,
continue, I just want to interrupt there
yes,
because
yeah, of
Raoul
course,
Wallenberg was a cousin of the Wallenbergs, and of course he's
I
very famous in America. Was we were about to
I'm
talk
com
about that? He does, yeah.
I'm
Sorry.
coming to him.
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
great minds think alike, Pelle,
Carry on.
because
Yeah.
I was just about to say the
Okay.
family's American ties also helped secure the appointment of Raoul Wallenberg, which was one of the cousins in the from the banking branch of the family. You have to remember that the Wallenberg family was not only these bankers, it was also a very, very highly productive cultural and humanitarian family. So I mean, you can't say all Wallenbergs are bad. It's just that some Wallenbergs have less of a moral compass than others. Raoul Wallenberg, of course, had a great moral compass, and he was sent to the Swedish legation in Budapest in 44, and the US War Refugee Board partly funded this mission. And Jacob Wallenberg used the political weight to get Raoul the diplomatic cover he needed. And of course, he saved tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews, which of course later became the family's moral counterweight to the wartime profiteering allegations. So, in short, the Wallenbergs did not pick a side. They kept both sides confident that Sweden's biggest bank and Sweden's biggest military industrial companies were working for them. So the policies secured huge profits and left the family's corporate empire intact when peace came. And of course, you don't have to be a Nobel Prize winner to realize that if you have had an intact industry loaded with capital and the rest of the world was basically in shambles, that you could reshape Swedish industry and international industry to your liking. So after the war, Wallenberg families started the key or evolved the key Swedish companies. You had Saab, you had Ericsson, the telecommunications company. You had Bofors, today British BAE Systems. You had Kockums, which built submarines and today's stealth technology, frigates and things like this. And you also had a company called Celsius, which had naval systems, ammunition, and robotics, which was later sold to Saab. And aside from that, you had the bank, and you had the SKF, and you had other um, companies. So this is basically how Wallenberg started to control Swedish industry, and they did it through something called investor and its associated foundations. So now the family sits at the center of Swedish defense industrial complex. Whenever Sweden needs new planes, new submarines, new upgrades to the Gripen flight fleet, the contracts flow into the companies where the Wallenberg hold the decisive vote. So this is the history of one of Europe's most influential military industrial profiteering families.
I think I mean, the Swedish economy is growing gangbusters. It's one of the most successful economies in Europe at the moment, and it's partly driven by this rearmament. Not least, Sweden's just donated a number of planes to Ukraine, the Gripen, which they're hoping to to sell to other markets. But I was at this Helsingborg meeting. You talked about Rubio and the Swedish Foreign Minister Maria Stenskog, whatever. Did they sign up to something? Because you said that officially, I mean, among the public, Trump's Greenland move in January upset a lot of people. Um, but behind the scenes, is the Swedish government going behind its public opinion and its European allies to go to bed with the Americans? There's something called Pax Sinica, for instance, and the technology prosperity deal.
Yes, if we perhaps we if we start with Pax Silica and then go on to the technology deal which was signed during Helsingborg. But the Pax Silica agreement is a central mechanism for binding Sweden's tech sector, and by that I mean specifically Ericsson, telecommunications company, which has been at the heart of many of the Western shenanigans during the Cold War and post-Cold War era. It will more tie these interests more tightly to the United States while structurally decoupling from China. So the Pax Silica Declaration basically explicitly identifies Ericsson as a strategic asset for building resilient 5G infrastructure and secure these shall I call them information technology supply chains. So this is not a peripheral cooperation. It basically positions Sweden's most important technological company as an operational component of US supply chain security policy, which, in my opinion, effectively subordinates a key national interest to American geopolitical priorities. We are a vassal state
Mm,
for all intents and purposes.
mm,
And the agreement aligns Sweden with a very United States centric technology
mm,
view rather than a European alternative. for example, a cloud structure and AI structure, digital infrastructure. So this commitment comes precisely at a time when the EU has said it's developing its own technology
mm,
and its own sovereign framework to reduce dependence on non-European providers.
mm,
So what Sweden has done is joining before any EU-wide decision has been made, and Sweden has basically preempted the collective European bargaining chip and signaled a clear preference for a United States-led digital architecture by signing this Pax Silica deal.
mm,
And I see this as a highly dangerous policy,
mm,
and especially since it sidesteps China,
mm,
because Chinese dominance in critical mineral processing
mm.
and in advanced electronic production is critical for Sweden. So I'm not sure that
So they're
this
cutting off
geopolitical
China. I mean,
alignment is not
they're
yeah,
lashing themselves to the mast of a sinking empire without telling the people or seeking the vote from the people, basically.
exactly, exactly.
Martin, I just want to say one thing, uh,
Sure.
and that is that during that Helsingborg meeting, Sweden said that it would be the staging post for a war against Russia if it were in the Baltics. I mean, isn't this something that's happen without consultation? I noticed where I'm at, they're building a huge motorway which is going to connect the west coast to the east coast of Sweden, and the part I'm in was not motorwayed up. And they're doing that with NATO money. So and there are two air bases quite near us, and we can hear them going at all hours, flying planes. What do you think of this, and how democratic is this? What the Swedish elite are doing? This defense minister who's parachuted in from nowhere. He was trained at King's College London, which is a spy school, an agent school, basically for British intelligence assets. Nobody had heard of him, and carrying out a policy of the Wallenbergs, who said that when the Swedes went to Finland to discuss NATO membership, the Wallenberg family were trailing the Swedish politicians. So again, we see these elite networks making decisions across the Atlantic with their oligarch class, with the military, and the Swedish people are completely left out of it, abandoning a 200
Yes,
year old period of neutrality that's worked very well for them.
there are, and if you want to follow the not the paper trail but the person trail, the um, not the politician, but one of the senior non-political governmental workers, basically a Lord Appleby kind of fellow. I just lost his name, Sten something.
Hmm.
Uh, that he was the chief negotiator for Sweden's entry into NATO. And he worked for both the Social Democratic government and then he transitioned working for the new conservative government, which was voted in later. And after he finished forcing Sweden into NATO, he was recruited by, guess what family? The Wallenbergs. So he was lifted into the Wallenberg family and the Wallenberg industries, basically a reward for a deed well done.
Mm,
So the thing is that no politician in Sweden wanted a real debate on NATO. They just went with the general scare tactics and were able to, as the Swedish constitution is outlined and written, there was nothing formally wrong by doing what they did. So you can't go and say it was an upheaval of democracy and things like this because there's no legal basis to say that because Swedish democracy works this way.
mm,
However, there is today no current party in the Swedish parliament that you can vote for if you wish to leave NATO. Because even the Green Party and the former communist, the Left Party, that voted no to NATO, has said that, well, we're not going to be actively pursuing Sweden leaving NATO today because we think maybe it's actually quite good if Sweden stays in NATO.
mm,
And it's the same with giving military hardware to and donating it to Ukraine. Both the leftist party and the Green Party have said, we just love giving Gripen planes to Ukraine. That's what Ukraine needs to win the war and defeat Russia. So, if no matter what your personal ideological affliction is, there is no party you can vote for today that will bring Sweden out of NATO. And that is how cemented we are to the idea of NATO today in Sweden amongst the political class.
Mm.
So
Martin, what are
it's
your thoughts?
a
Sorry.
tough situation.
Appalled by what you have to tell us, Mats. And it strikes me there is a common language. One occasionally finds it in Britain, one finds it often in America and Canada, that small countries, at least, and certainly it was true in the past, uh, should be able to preserve diversity and independence of view uh, in the face of massive international, both financial and military alliance uniformity and authoritarianism, which increasingly slides towards totalitarianism. But what you have just documented is there is no way out, that it is actually easier, if anything, in the smaller the country is, to quietly, slowly, steadily impose a totally totalitarian, lockstep view of the world. And if it's done gently enough and smoothly enough, people will accept it. Clearly you are a dissident to this view, but are you alone as a dissident? Are there significant dissidents, by which I mean specifically in the media, not as lawbreakers or subversives or even as political activists? But the impression I get is that they are able to do this because the public, as is the case in Britain and at least in half of America, are brainwashed. And they simply accept the lockstep view. Gallant little Ukraine, just as genocidal little Belgium was so gallant in face of the big bad evil Germans back in 1914, which was certainly not the case. Or Poland was little, which it was not, and was gallant, which it was, but was also virtuous, which its governments were certainly not in the 1920s and 1930s. And yet, of course, they single-handedly blocked any sensible impulse from Britain and France to join with the Soviet Union to block in Hitler, which was the only way Hitler could have been stopped. Now, here again, we have a mad impulse towards war. The dynamics are different, obviously. But is anyone in a obviously individuals like yourself are courageously standing up in this, but you appear to be totally isolated. Are there how significant are the voices of common sense and sanity and independence left in Sweden? It sounds from what your analysis they've virtually all been snuffed out.
They are. It's the media is very squarely rooted in a NATO strategic narrative, a NATO positive strategic narrative. And anyone that veers off course is quickly deemed a Putinist and is cancelled from more, shall I say, mainstream media exposure.
Just so like happened to me in America.
Yes, exactly. And it's very efficient because a lot of the journalists today are on a they are not they're not the old kind. They work on a freelance basis, which means in order to get the next job or the next assignment, they need to be on a freelance basis, and in order to be that, they have to adhere to the general strategic narrative.
Of course they do.
So it's very, very quickly that you're blocked if you try to communicate that this isn't the public service in Sweden. They have an obligation to remain neutral while reporting. But often at least once every day, I hear something that makes me grab my blood pressure medicine because it's so blatantly propagandistic. But once you call them or you talk to them, they just don't want to hear your arguments.
Yes.
So it's more or less impossible to gain access to the Swedish media circuit. And for speaking for myself, for example, I've been on Press TV, I've been on Russia Today, I've been on Turkish TV, I've been on Brazilian radio, I've been on Egyptian media, I've been in talking to Indian audiences, basically millions of people. But it would be impossible for me to get even 1 minute to reach out to maybe 100,000 Swedes, because no one in Sweden would touch me on a mainstream media news segment,
Mm.
because what I say is a danger to the strategic narrative that is presented.
Mm.
And it's since the media doesn't dwell into the foundation of the created cycle where past and present military industrial earnings keep financing the idea of a continued animosity towards Russia,
Mm.
nothing is going to happen, because a lot of people don't see the connection between the military industrial complex and the need for an enemy, because they're kind of abstract values
Mm.
where you need to sit down and have a conversation with someone. But that is not allowed. So the battle for the strategic narrative is very much ongoing in Sweden. And woe unto you if you say something that might even remotely be suspected of being pro-Russian or
Mm.
even anti-Zelensky, and you will be immediately called out.
I just want to say something that, I mean, you're not like some I mean, you've got a very, very good job, well-paid, prestigious job in the Ministry of Justice or something. I mean, you're a lawyer with many years' experience, so you're actually you're not just anybody writing in who has a lot of time watching daytime TV. I mean, you're a serious person. Um, but and you, the other thing I'd say I praise you for is that you actually take the time to write to Swedish journalists and argue with them in the way that John Stuart Mill would say, you know, argue with people as if they're adults to try and persuade them, don't condemn them. And I mean, I would never have the energy for that. I just think they're a lost cause. But I mean, it's so funny. It must be for our foreign listeners to say, well, isn't Sweden according to Freedom House, CIA backed, by the way, but a lot of people don't know that. Sweden is the world's biggest democracy, and the Swedish media are full of self-congratulatory articles about how other countries produce misinformation, whereas Swedish media just produces the truth, right? But if you
Like the
live here,
BBC.
Like
if
the
you live
BBC,
here,
but
you're living in a complete information bubble. I mean, and that's why the
Yes.
polls show that the Swedes, more than any other European country, are prepared to send troops down to fight the Russians. Country that's had peace for 200 years and lost all its wars with Russia. They don't care. They don't need the Americans. Who needs Americans? The Swedes will go down on their own and fight the Russians. The peaceful pacifist Swedes, because of media propaganda, as powerful as anything put out by Goebbels, in my view.
it is, and I think they work. The Swedish public service companies work by uh, propaganda by omission. It's not so
Yes.
much that they outright blatantly lie, but they omit the view or a dissenting view. If something happens, then they only give the view of the Ukrainian or the NATO side, and they omit anything that might be contradictory to the narrative that's presented. For example, just a few days ago, or almost a week now, the Ukrainians attacked a school in Luhansk,
Yes.
and it was hit by Ukrainian drones. Now, had this been a Russian drone, pardon me, striking a school, God forbid, striking a school directly in Ukraine, there would of course have been an uproar in Swedish media. But what happened now, and this is quite interesting, it's just a quick story, a quick anecdote, is the fact that 2 days after, because the Swedish media, they had to report that a Ukrainian drone had struck a Russian school, because it was internationally, it actually became quite a big deal. So Swedish radio, in this case, reported that a Ukrainian drone had struck a Russian school. However, suddenly, on the third day, there was a report that said, well, there have been some inconsistencies in the reporting on the strike on this school. It might actually have been a school that was involved in producing drones. And we have done some OSINT work, online intelligence work, that might actually support this thesis. But we don't know, but it could possibly be this way as well.
Yes.
So suddenly, public service in Sweden is looking for alternative explanations to something that happened in the war. But all those hundreds of times when Ukraine has claimed that a Russian missile has struck somewhere, and very simple online intelligence work points out quickly that this was actually a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile, or this was actually a Ukrainian false flag happening, or something like this, that's always omitted. But suddenly, when Ukraine made a very disastrous decision to attack a school, Swedish public service starts making excuses. So this is just one of the most flagrant examples of how preserving a strategic narrative is the main idea of the Swedish public service today. So there you understand why
We've
the
got 4 minutes
Swedish
left, Martin. Do
mindset.
you want to say something before we wind up?
I could go first, Matt. Simply, we must have you back. These are such huge topics, and these issues are so unknown outside Sweden that you have to inform a wider audience. And also here in America, where I am, we have seen the same pattern on a gigantic scale that you are explaining in the microcosm, and you are throwing light on our dilemma as well as your own. So please come back soon. The one point that flies at me is in the historical context. If one looks at the Stalinist scale genocides in Mexico under Porfirio Diaz 150 years ago, the worst tyrant in American history, in Western Hemisphere history, strongly supported by the British and French, and also New York, but mainly British and French financial interests at that time. He was protected by the liberal so-called free media in London and Paris the same way from all his gigantic atrocities, the same way that you are explaining to us how the Swedish media has thrown its protective cloak over Zelensky's latest, clique's latest war crime. So this is hugely relevant, I think, what you are saying.
Yeah, I'll just wind up now. So thank you so much, Mats. I mean, we'll talk another time about the possibilities. I mean, the Swedes don't want the war to end, they say, because Russia is going to send all its forces up to the Baltic, but they might be doing that anyway in the Swedish mindset. So there is a sort of slightly unpleasant war atmosphere in Sweden at the moment. But we won't have time even to broach that subject. But I mean, there is a readiness among the Swedes. They always want to be the best kid in class, so they're going to be the best cannon fodder in the entire world. Well done, Sweden. You've got the teacher's pet. We love you even more, says Rubio,
Yes,
if you sacrifice yourselves for us. Yeah, we're going to be the world's best cannon fodder. And we're going to die more gallantly than anyone else, you know.
If we wind it up on that note, Rubio actually said in the meeting in Helsingborg, he lauded the Swedes for being the most NATO country amongst the NATO countries.
Yeah.
He said, this is the kind of country we want in NATO. And of course, all the Swedish politicians thought that was something good.
Yeah,
and they looked so happy.
Right.
Me, on the other hand, I was terrified at this hearing this, but it proved my point.
But there are a few lonely voices out there in Sweden that show that you redeem the Swedish nation's perfidy and stupidity, and you're one of them, Mats. Anyway, we've got to wind up there. Thank you so much, Martin and Mats.
Thank you, Mats.
See you soon again.
Soon.
Take care.
Yes, of
Bye.
course. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.